that you can send it to me. Okay. Okay. So good morning, everybody. And like Eliyahu said, yes, it's a thorough discussion, and not politics. But obviously, one can't ignore the fact that the reason why I chose to prepare this year is because this topic is in the news. So that's the elephant in the room. I'm not here to discuss what our attitude should be, but simply, towards the legal system or the Roe v. Wade. That's not what we're discussing over here. We're going to stick clearly to the halachas of abortion, and when it's allowed, when it's not allowed, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to start off with the Zohar. The Zohar says something fascinating in the beginning of Parashat Shmos. I don't have the Aramaic here. I'm reading the English. Okay, I don't know if the Aramaic would help anybody. Okay, so the Zohar says like this: there are three people who drive away the Shekhinah from the world, making it impossible for the Holy One, blessed be He, to rest the Shekhinah, to fix His abode in the universe, and causing prayer to be unanswered. Yeah, three things which cause the Shekhinah to be driven away from the world and make it impossible for Tikkun Olam, what that means, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to fix His world, and causing prayer, tefillos, to be unanswered, causing prayer to be unanswered. And it has a list. And the third one is someone who causes a fetus to be destroyed in the womb, because he's destroying the Tselem of Elokim, the form, the creation of Hashem, and the form of Hashem, blessed be He, and his Ma'aseh Yodai, his workmanship, the work of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then he even says, and I don't know what the source is, I didn't have a chance to look into it, but that what you want to call it, feticide or terminating a pregnancy, falls under the category of Toyevois Mitzrayim, the abominations which they did in Mitzrayim. It's not in the Pasuk, right? In Parashas Oshim and Emor, when it talks about like the deeds of the acts of the land of Egypt, one shouldn't do. It doesn't seem to give any reference or even an allusion to abortion, to killing a fetus. But the Zohar, and I didn't have a chance to look into what the Zohar is based on, but the Zohar says this is what considered one of the Toyevos, one of the abominations that they did in Egypt. And I believe in the same Zohar, it says that that in Mitzrayim, we know that there was a gzeira, there was a decree, that every Jew at some point during the Golos, during the exile of Egypt, the Pharaoh decreed that every single boy should be thrown to the Nile, the daughters could be stay alive, but there was this decree, and we know it's to such a degree that the Medrash tells us, and it's brought down in Rashi, Gemara and Rashi say that Amram, the father of Moshe Rabbeinu, had a daughter at the time, Miriam, but he decided that I don't want to bring any children into the world, and he separated from his wife. That's what the Medrash says. And Miriam convinced her father to go and remarry. He says, your gzeira is worse than Pari. What you're doing is worse than Pari. Your decree is worse than Pari. Pari only is making a decree on the men. You're making a decree because you're not having children. You don't know whether you're going to have a male child or a female child. You're not having any children. It's even worse. You can't do that. Anyway, what we see from there is that, yes, there may have been people, including even Amram, who was the Gadol Ador, the leader of the generation at the time, who separated from their wives, but says the Zohar that nobody entertained the notion that after the pregnancy already started to end the pregnancy, to have an abortion. And by the way, abortion is not some sort of modern concept. It's always some form, obviously, we're much more advanced in how we do it, but the concept of abortion, terminating the pregnancy, has been here forever. People doing it. So says the Zohar that this was, we see that even in Mitzrayim, where there was such a gzeira, imagine, you know that 50% of the children approximately are going to be thrown into the Nile, and yet, and if you have any reason to end the pregnancy, I mean, that would be quite high up on the list. Anyway, so this is a starting point, which means to say like this. I'm saying this as an introduction, just because obviously we're going to bring different opinions about the severity of abortion, ranging from one extreme, so to speak, to the other extreme. But I think it's worthwhile, just as the Divrei Hagdama, the words of the introduction, to say this, that regardless of the technical halachic parameters and technicalities of how forbidden it is, whether it's literally considered murder, as we'll soon see, some say it's actually murder, others say no, it's much less, and we'll see the details soon. But either way, the Zohar talks about how terrible it is, and the Shechina doesn't come down, etc., and so on and so forth. That's caveat number one. Caveat number two is that this is halacha v'lo lamaisa, which means to say that it should never come to it. But obviously, there are situations, complications during pregnancy, which demand a real shaila question. Your doctors may be advising that the best thing to do is an abortion, or there's a danger to the woman's life, or a potential danger, etc. And nothing that is said in this year is meant at all to shed any light on halacha lamaisa issue, or chas v'shalom, if somebody had to in the past go to a rav and they got a heta to have an abortion. No one, the shir over here is not casting aspersions, casting any doubt on any rabbinic sack that some of you receive, but just to lay out the sugya from to lay out the discussion, how it comes down from the psukim, down to the Mishnah, down to the Gemara, down to the some of the Rishonim in this discussion. It's much of the discussions in what's called the early Achronim of like 100, 200 years ago. And finally, to contemporary times. Okay, so that's a little bit of an introduction. Growing up, I'm going to kind of start with the what do we know? What do we come in? When I was a child, I don't know, a child, a teen, or whatever, my assumption was always very simple: killing ending a pregnancy is basically like killing another person. And the only exception is when the the fetus poses a danger to the mother's life, because then it's what's called a roidev, which means to say that even if, generally speaking, you're never allowed to kill anybody. Obviously, so you're not allowed to murder somebody. And the only exception, obviously, there's wartime, but basically the only exception where you're allowed to kill another Jew or anybody is when you have what the person's threatening you. Person is posing an active threat. So then, if necessary, also only if necessary, because if it's not necessary, then you have to shoot him in the foot, you have to disable him in some other way. But if absolutely necessary, or whatever you think it's necessary, that you don't think too much into it, then you're allowed to kill that person who's threatening you. So even a 50-year-old person who chas v'shalom is coming to threaten a person, you're allowed to kill him. So as a child growing up, as a teenager, whatever, the basic assumption was abortion is murder, and the only time it's permitted is when the child poses a threat to the mother's life. So then the reason why you can kill the child is because he's considered a roidif. It's no fault of the fetus, but the roidif, the fetus at the end of the day is a threat to the mother's life. Whenever there's a threat to somebody's life, you're allowed to take care of that threat. You're allowed to kill. That's always kind of and that's what a lot of people know. They learn Rambam. That's what it sounds like. And really, it's a lot more complicated than that, not only because there's other opinions which argue with the Rambam, but as we'll soon see, even the Rambam itself, there's multiple ways of learning the Rambam. So that's, maybe we have such a starting point, or as I grew a little bit older, it was presented that there's Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's opinion in today's generation, who said that abortion is mamish, literally murder. And on the other hand, you have the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, who held that abortion was maybe at a rabbinic prohibition, or perhaps even if it's not a rabbinic prohibition, it's an issue of wounding. It's not life at all. It's an issue of wounding, and therefore it's much more lenient. Anytime there's some sort of great need, it's okay. And again, it was presented as this kind of simplistic kind of thing. There's two views. On one hand, you have the people, the Moshe Feinstein, who says it's murder, and on the other hand, you have those who say it's just a rabbinic prohibition or a very minor biblical prohibition. And again, in this year, I'm going to try and show you that it's a little bit more, there's more of a range, it's more complicated. So that's like the second introduction. And then finally, what we have to always remember is, when we're talking about ending a pregnancy, that there are three factors. When Halacha deals with terminating a pregnancy, there's three factors that we look into. Number one is, what's the reason for terminating the pregnancy? Posing a threat to the mother's life, or some other reason. So what's the reason? That's going to be a consideration. Number two is, what stage of pregnancy, right? And perhaps people maybe think that it's not so. In Judaism, there isn't such a distinction. It's not true. There's a distinction made in Judaism, in Halacha and in Gemara, and in Halacha, and the way people understand the Gemara, between different stages of pregnancy. Generally speaking, there's a stage of 40 days, which is one stage. I'm not going to talk about the morning after pill. Let's leave that out. Let's assume that that's not part of the discussion of ending a pregnancy. But from 2 or 3 days after conception till 40 days or so, that's one stage. And then from 40 days till 3 months, even, there is such a distinction made. and for 3 months till viability, like at the beginning of the 7th month, what they call, that the child could be viable outside the womb, is also mentioned by some poskim as a factor. And finally, even within the 9th pregnancy, there's a difference made between the 9th pregnancy, the 9th month, and when the woman is actually sitting on what they call the birthing stool or whatever, she's mamish ready to give birth. So then there's another stage, and obviously once the head of the baby comes out, then that's mamish like any other child, any other person. Okay. So, and then the third factor, which is also sometimes discussed, we're not going to get into that, but I'm just bringing it just so is the means of abortion. There are some halakhic authorities who make a distinction between a more direct way and a more indirect way. One is where they're actually taking, and another is like the woman takes a medication which causes her to, some sort of indirect way. That some which make a distinction between that as well. So there's 3 factors, and we're going to talk more about the first actually, which is in other words, what's the basis of the prohibition of abortion, and based on that, we'll understand, depending on what the issue is, what's the prohibition of abortion, there'll be practical ramifications of when it is allowed, meaning in which circumstances, right? As opposed to which stage. Which stage, hopefully, if we have time, we'll go a little bit into it, but more. So the main discussion we're going to do today is what is the basis of the prohibition of abortion. So even in the 8th month, right? Even later on in pregnancy, what is the problem of abortion, or shall we say, or let's even make it more simple. Let's just assume for the beginning of the year we're talking any point between 40 days and the beginning of the 7th month. Let's put it that way. Yeah. In other words, 40 days the baby's already started developing, and at 6 months or around that time, in the 7th month, it's already able to live outside of the womb. So we won't talk about those 2 extremes. We'll talk about okay. So let's start. After all those introductions, we can start with the sugya, the actual discussion at hand. So the basic halachic principle governing abortion in halacha, in other words, the actual halacha, is a mishnah. It's a mishnah in Alois, Perik Zayin, Mishnah Vav. It's interesting because Alois talks about, it's not really talking about laws between, it's laws, generally talking about laws of tumah. Anyway, but in that context, we're talking about the tumah of a so in that context, there's a Mishnah which is really nothing to do with tumah, nothing to do with the laws of purity and impurity. The Mishnah says like this, that a woman who is sitting mamish ala mashber, that says, it's actually she's sitting ready to give birth. That's the case which the Mishnah talks about. The Mishnah doesn't talk about earlier on, 3rd month, 5th month, 7th month. The Mishnah talks about a situation we're talking about the very late end of the very latest point where the woman is ready to give birth and she's having a difficulty she's having difficulty, and the fetus is presenting a threat to the mother's life as the fetus is trying to come out. Before it comes out, we understand that there's a death, there's a threat to the mother's life. Says the Mishnah, the words of the Mishnah is that, very graphic actually, the words of the Mishnah, that you can cut the that you can literally cut the child into pieces and take it out. Why? Because her life comes before his life. Yeah, those are right. If you want to be medai, you want to talk a little bit about the language used. It doesn't say, oh well, the child's life isn't a life; it's not considered a life. The language used is her life takes precedence over the fetus's life, and therefore you can end the pregnancy. You can basically kill the fetus in order to save the mother's life, and this is even at the end, right end of the pregnancy. Then the Mishnah continues. Yotzah, there's different versions in the Mishnah where it says Yotzah Roishai or Yotzah Rubai. The halacha is understood that as soon as the Roishai, as soon as the head comes out of the mother's body, that's it. Too late. Even now that it's posing a threat, at that point we have to let nature take its course. We can't do any harm to the fetus, even though it's still presenting a threat to the mother's life, and if things continue, it's too late. Why? The Mishnah's language is ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. One doesn't push away one life in front of another. It's a simple principle. At this point, the fetus is no longer a fetus; it's a person, and you can't kill one person in order to save another. That's the Mishnah in Alois, chapter 7, Mishnah 6. So I'm going to explain the Mishnah now. Maybe I confused you earlier with the whole Roida thing. So let's forget that I ever told you anything about the Roida. But I'm going to explain the Mishnah the way most people understand the Rishonim, different Rishonim like Rashi and the Ran and the Ramban and the Ritva, all the big Rishonim, besides for the Rambam, all say very simple how to explain this Mishnah. What's the Mishnah? How do you explain the Mishnah? Ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh. When the child's head comes out of the mother's womb, the mother's body, so then the child's life is alive. Before that, the reason why you're allowed to kill the fetus before that is, as Rashi says, mipnei she'eino nefesh. It's not a nefesh, it's not considered a soul, it's not considered a person at that stage. And therefore, in a situation where it's presenting a threat to the mother's life, you're allowed to kill the fetus. That's the basic understanding of how, if you read Rashi and you read I know that there are halakhic authorities today who learn those texts differently, but that's for the purpose of presentation. If one just simply learns Rashi, and the same thing with the other Rishonim, a whole list of early authorities, talking about in the 13th, 14th century time, and even earlier, Rashi is in the 11th, 12th century, who say that the rationale is very simple. Once the baby's born, he's a person. Before a baby's born, before the head comes out of the woman's body, it's not a person. It's not a person. So you obviously you save the mother's life. You save that, even if abortion is forbidden, and even if it's forbidden because for whatever we'll get into this soon. The point is, the simple principle the pashtos over here is working is that pikuach nefesh doicha kol haTorah kula. There's a principle of the life of a person overrides the whole Torah. But if you just learn the Mishnah, it does seem that the only situation in which you can end the pregnancy, kill the fetus, is when it poses a threat to the mother's life. And then we have the rationale that her life comes before his life. And when we say his life, we don't really mean that he's a real life in the sense that it's a person, because we say that once the head comes out, ein doichin nefesh mipnei nefesh, one doesn't push away one soul because of another. And as Rashi and the other Rishonim, before the head comes out, it's not considered a nefesh. So that's the mission. And like I said, it does seem like in a situation where there's no danger to the mother's life, ending the fetus would be forbidden. That's what it sounds like. And I'm saying that it sounds like because we'll soon see that not everyone agrees to that. And the question is, what's the prohibition, right? You've told me, what's the prohibition of abortion? Before the head comes out, it sounds like it's only allowed in certain circumstances, at the very least. And the reason why we're allowing it here is because it poses a threat to the mother's life. But if it wouldn't pose a threat to the mother's life, or there wouldn't be any stammaza, you wouldn't be able. So what is the prohibition? What is the prohibition of abortion? Okay. So there's a number of approaches, really. And we're going to start off just with the basic approach, which is that it's a biblical prohibition to abort a baby. But this is the middle one. I'm actually not doing it in there's a biblical prohibition to end a pregnancy. What is it? Like most of the Rishonim say, the Rishonim don't say that the reason, simple explanation is the reason why you are allowed to kill it before the head comes out, even though it's a potential life, is because Eino Nefesh is not considered a Nefesh. If it's not considered a Nefesh, all the psukim which talk about killing somebody and being liable for killing say Nefesh. They say that you have to be Chiyak Maka Nefesh, Chiyak Nefesh. So it's not murder. It's not murder. And but what is it? It's a biblical prohibition. And what's the biblical prohibition? That's the question. What's the biblical prohibition? So one approach is like this, generally speaking. One approach is like this. The pasuk says in Bereshit, in Parshas Noach, Parshas Noach, Hashem is telling Noach about the seven mitzvahs which He's commanded him and his children. The pasuk says like this: Shoifech dama adam ba'adam dama yishafech. If someone spills the blood of a person, dama yishafech, his blood will be spilled. In other words, he's chayav misa, is culpable with a death penalty. And the pasuk continues, keep it salem elakim ases adam. The reason why this is the case, right? You kill an animal, right? It's also life, yeah. But you're not culpable for killing an animal. You're not supposed to do it unless there's a need. But no one's, there's no chayav misa for killing an animal. So what's the reason why there's a problem to murder a human being? The reason is keep it salem elakim ases adam. The person is made in the image of Hashem. He has seich, whatever the different explanations of what that means. He has an intellect, whatever it may be. He's made in the form of Hashem, and therefore, right, and you're not allowed to kill. And if you do, you're chayav misa, you're dama yishaf. That's the pasuk which talks about murdering a person, which is a chiyuv on the whole humankind. It's not just for Jewish people. This is Hashem talking to Noach. So that's the pasuk. Now the language used over there is interesting. It doesn't say shoifech dama adam dama yishaf. It says shoifech dam ha adam ba adam. if someone spills the blood of a person which is within a person, a very strange language. It could have just said one who spills the blood of a person. Here it doesn't say one who spills the blood of the person. It says one who spills the blood of an Adam ba-Adam. So there's other ways of explaining this pasuk, but in the Brisa, the Tanai statement brought down in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Nun Tes, I think. Nun Tes Amud Aleph 59a, Sanhedrin 59a. There's I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, there's a Brisa which says that from this we understand Shoifech Dama Adam Adam is telling you like this. If it would have just said Shoifech Dama Adam, someone who spills the blood of a human being, so then it would mean a human being once he's born, right? In other words, the Talmud understood the basic assumption is that when is a person considered a person? Once he's born. But since the pasuk says an extra word, it doesn't just say Shoifech Dama Adam, it says Dama Adam ba-Adam, someone who spills the blood of a person which is within a person. Ezahu Adam Sheba Adam, paraphrasing it, what's considered a human being which is within another human being? That's a fetus. A fetus is a human being of some sort, which is within another human being. Since the pasuk uses those extra words, so we go a step further than one would have said otherwise. One would have said otherwise is only if you actually murder a person who's born. But here we have a pasuk, Dama Adam Adam. And this is a prohibition for non-Jews. And from here, and this is actually the halacha for B'nai Noach. We're not going to go into it, but the halacha for a non-Jew is that if he kills a fetus, then he's actually chayiv misa. Just a note, by the way, I just want to point out that in itself is not a proof that abortion is murder, because we know, al-pi halacha, whether we like it or whether it's something that sits well with us or not, that the halacha is that a non-Jew, at least, right, if you look in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, a non-Jew is chayiv misa is for any sin that he right, if he steals a penny, right, if he steals a cent, right, he's chayav misa. So however you explain, I'm not going into that now, but I just want to point out, I'm not trying to lessen. All I'm trying to say is that the fact that the Torah says that abortion, that there's a problem with abortion for a non-Jew and he's chayav misa, doesn't mean that it's literally murder. It means to say that it's forbidden. Right? What's the nature of the prohibition? We'll go there soon. So that's for non-Jews. What about Jews? The issue is like this. For Jews, the problem is that the pasuk says clearly, there's a mechilta, there's a medrash, medrash halacha, is a Tanaic statement which says that there's a pasuk in Parashas Mishpatim which says if two people are fighting and while they're fighting they hit a pregnant woman. So then the pasuk gives two scenarios. It says like this: if there is no accident, so then if there's no accident. So what's the last the pasuk? It says if there's no accident, so then and the understanding is that there's no accident with the mother. This is how the Talmud understands the pasuk. Christians have a different pshat. We're not here to learn their pshatim in the Torah now, right? But the Talmud understands the pasuk to mean that if there's no accident, meaning that the mother is safe and sound, that she's okay, and it's just and the baby falls out, the fetus falls out, and the fetus is dead on a right. The fetus came out and is dead. So then you have to pay money. You pay money to the husband. That's what it says. You should pay money. If there's an osa, and if there's an accident, which means that the mother's life was killed, then the nosato nefesh tachas nefesh, then there's a chiyuv misa, and there's discussion about it as well. But the point is that we see that for killing the fetus, there's no potential misa at all, and you have to pay money. And the truth is that from the fact that there's money, some halakhic authorities say that, by the way, that there's even an opinion in there's a principle of kamle b'drabim, which means whenever a person is chayav money and he does one act which makes him be chayav a death penalty plus money, you only get the death penalty, not the money. So the fact that the Torah says you chayav money means that there's no death penalty, and according to some, no death penalty even bidei shamayim. According to one opinion in the Gemara, even if there's misa bidei shamayim, even if there was a heavenly death penalty that God takes care of, there wouldn't be a chiyuv mammon down here. So it's a raya that killing for a Jewish person who kills a fetus, even intentionally, would only be chayav money, and there wouldn't be a chiyuv misa. So one thing's for sure, that a Jewish person who kills a fetus is not chayav misa, even though a non-Jew is. So this is an issue of it. What's going on? If a non-Jew kills a fetus, it's chayav misa. He gets a death penalty, and a Jewish person doesn't. So what exactly is going on over here? And what is the prohibition of abortion for a Jewish person? And is there one? So here we get to a principle called mi'e kamidi. The Gemara says, I'm going to explain it. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin, in multiple places actually in the Talmud, there's a basic governing principle. There's different ways of understanding it, but we don't have to get into the details of how to understand it. There's a basic principle which is like this. It doesn't make any sense that a non-Jew would be forbidden in an act and a Jew would be permitted. That doesn't add up, right? We know it's the other way around. There's a non-Jew is allowed to eat pork, a non-Jew is allowed to be mechal Shabbos. In fact, he's not allowed to keep Shabbos. He's allowed, right? But he's allowed to transgress Shabbos. Non-Jews are whatever. They have 7 mitzvahs, but besides that, they can do whatever they want. And we have all these restrictions. So it makes no sense to say that a non-Jew should get a death penalty for killing a fetus, and we are allowed to do it. Or it's not a prohibition. It's not a biblical prohibition. It doesn't make any sense. The Torah, the Bible, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, would never allow something for a Jewish person to do which a non-Jew is not allowed. And therefore, this is the basis. It's the mainstream opinion which says that there's a biblical prohibition for killing a fetus. I'm using the word killing a fetus, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the prohibition is a murder. Let's just, the prohibition, the ending of pregnancy is clear because a non-Jew is chayav misa for doing so. If you spill the blood of a person within a person, he's chayav misa. It's such a terrible sin that he's chayav misa, whatever. It's a prohibition. So for us, even though we know from the Pesukim that we're not culpable for the death penalty, so there's different explanations as to why that really may be, but that doesn't make it. But that's not a problem because we know many things that the punishment for the non-Jew is more severe than a Jew, right? If a Jew steals, he gives back the money. A non-Jew steals, he's technically chayav misa. So that's not an issue. But the issue is one thing's for sure: if something's prohibited for a non-Jew, it must be prohibited for us on a biblical level. The Torah wouldn't say a non-Jew is not allowed to do an abortion, and a Jew can do it. And the rabbis came later, oh, you do also, don't do it, just be, no. This approach says, could there possibly even be a situation which, right? And that's the basic. Now, how you understand the prohibition could be in different ways, and we'll go through them soon. But this is the mainstream opinion that there's a biblical prohibition. Now, I have to mention, so what is the biblical prohibition? We'll get there soon. I do have to mention that there are numerous authorities, and there might even be implication in the Rishonim, that abortion is only rabbinic in nature. Now, I say it because I'm not going to go into length and explain to you why that's the case, because I've just illustrated to you that there's a biblical prohibition, and that's logically makes sense, because committee could there be something which is biblically prohibited for a non-Jew and permitted for a Jew? So for sure it's biblically prohibited. That's how I explained it to you. But there are a number of opinions, important poskim, who say that abortion is only forbidden on a rabbinic level. Now, that doesn't mean that it's lenient. In fact, many of those opinions who say that it's rabbinic in nature, they use the word michzik, it looks like it's murder. They understand that even if it's a rabbinic prohibition, the nature of the prohibition is that the rabbis basically said there's a biblical prohibition to murder a person. We're going to extend that biblical prohibition of murder, and we're going to make a rabbinic, we're going to extend it to even pre-birth, even to the fetus. The point what I'm saying is it's a very severe rabbinic prohibition, right? Rabbinic prohibitions also can't just be moved around so easily. But there are those opinions which say it's a rabbinic prohibition, and because it's like extension, it's a rabbinic extension of murder. It looks like murder. And even according to those rabbinic prohibitions, there's room still to say that maybe there's still biblical issues with abortion, because at the end of the day, there's a positive mitzvah. When I say that it's a rabbinic prohibition, I'm talking about the prohibition. Think about it. There's a positive mitzvah to have children, right? In certain instances, maybe you're exempt from having children. But that positive mitzvah of having children, if you already have a child which is growing in your fetus, in the womb, a fetus in the womb, and if left alone, it's going to be a living person. So it's certainly against the spirit, if not the letter of the law, rule of having mitzvah of having children to abort the baby. But we're talking about the prohibition. What's the prohibition? Is that the actual prohibition? Is it just I'm not doing the mitzvah of pruv? I'm kind of taking my matzah erev Pesach and burning it and burning all the matzah in the town, so I'm not going to be able to eat matzah on the night of Pesach? Or is it an actual negative prohibition of a rabbinic prohibition? So these are the two approaches. The biblical prohibition, which is the mainstream view, and the prohibition is known. We don't know what the nature of it yet is, but it's known from the fact that it's meet a committee. A non-Jew is prohibited. A non-Jew gets the death penalty for ending a pregnancy. And you're going to tell me a Jew is permitted on a biblical level? That doesn't make any sense. For sure, a Jew is biblically prohibited. And then there's others who say, no, Jew could be prohibited rabbinically. What the explanation is, there's different approaches. Either they don't hold of this principle, mere committee, that the Gemara says, they say there's different. In other words, they say that it's not true. A non-Jew could be prohibited in certain things, we could be permitted. Or they say that at the end of the day, as long as there's some sort of prohibition, even if the prohibition is rabbinic in nature, it's good enough to satisfy the requirement that whatever's prohibited for a non-Jew is prohibited for a Jew. So true, it's prohibited for a non-Jew on a biblical level, and it's prohibited for a Jew on a rabbinic level. Okay, there's different explanations, but those are the approaches. Okay, what is the nature of the prohibition? Okay. And this really is if it's biblical and rabbinic. Up until now, I told you that if it's rabbinic, so then it's tzitzicha, it's murder. But what is the nature of the prohibition? And after we talk a little bit about the nature of the prohibition, we'll go to some practical ramifications of circumstances in which abortion will be either permitted or forbidden based on the different rationales. Okay. So what is the nature of the prohibition? Okay. So we'll start off with the hardline approach. Right? The hardline approach is best. There were early authorities who said this in one way or another. The Mizrahi, in his commentary on Rashi, seems to take the position that killing a fetus is actually literally murder, just like killing an adult. The pasuk says that you don't get misa for it, right? We know from the pasuk that you pay the father the money and you don't get a death penalty. Says the Mizrahi, that's a technical thing. This is a very controversial position, man. It's not the mainstream position at all, even within those who say it's murder. He says a very interesting thing. The Mizrahi, and I think there are others who say this as well. He says it's a technical thing. You can only get Bichai Misa if you kill somebody who's a real person. Now, over here, there's an issue. The reason why he's considered a nefesh is because he's going to live. But we don't know. Each fetus, we don't know. There's the majority of fetuses make it to be born, but some don't, right? There's a minority who don't get past the door, right? They don't. So it says like this: if we would know that this fetus, if we could be prophets, we could see into the future. He didn't say these words. I'm just right? If we could see into the future, no, this fetus is going to be is going to come out of the womb. It doesn't have to live forever, right? He's going to come out of the womb. He's going to be a person. You're going to be then you would be chayav misa now. You'd be chayav death penalty now. But because there's a whole principle that the Eidim witnesses have to give a warning, and there's different. So then we have to. They can't say, oh well, if this fetus that doesn't work. In other words, even though there's a majority, it's not good enough. In other words, there's a technical reason why there can't be a death penalty. That's the Mizrahi. There's other approaches to why you can't get the death penalty. Why there's no death penalty. But the hardline approach, which is brought down by the Mizrahi, comes out from Klein Brisker, the way he understands the Rambam, and the simple reading of the Rambam. Even let's put it that way. I'm not going to. The simple reading of the Rambam is that abortion, that killing a fetus, is murder. Okay, and we're going to assume now from 40 days and onwards. From 40 days and onwards, it's murder. And how do we know it's murder? I mean, not how do we know? Where do we see it in the Rambam? So the Rambam says like this. The Rambam is talking about the pursuer, the roider. If someone is threatening your life, and he talks about the halach. And in that context, he says, therefore, if there's a fetus which is presenting a threat to the mother's life, therefore you can abort the fetus. Therefore, you can kill the fetus. The question is, why does he need to get onto the rule of roider? Why does he need to get to explain that the child is a pursuer? There's a general rule. Even if abortion is a biblical prohibition, there's a general rule. When it comes to saving someone's life, it overrides the whole Torah. So what's going on over, right? When Shabbos, you don't think twice. At Shabbos, Chas v'Shalom, someone's life is even a distant, relatively remote danger, but you're worried about someone's life. You go and you call the ambulance. You call it Tzala. You go in the ambulance. You take the person to hospital, and it's Doicha Shabbos. Yom Kippur, you're allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. If abortion is a biblical prohibition, which is not connected to murder, it's a biblical prohibition. Whatever the nature is, maybe we'll talk. Right? We'll talk about the other option. But if it isn't murder, then there's no reason. You don't have to explain of roidef that the child is threatening the mother's life. Simple. In other words, and he's called a roidef, that he's a pursuer. It doesn't matter whether the child's threatening the woman's life or not. The point is, the mother's life's in danger. She can do whatever. She can do any prohibition. So therefore, Ramosha Feinstein and others learn that what the Maimonides is saying, Rambam Hilchos Ritzech, Shmiras Nefesh, Perik Aleph, I think Allah Tes, the laws of they understand that Maimonides is saying that it's murder to kill literally. In other words, the Torah says loy tzirtzach. When the Torah says do not murder in the pasuk, the Ten Commandments, right? You're going to read in Shavuos. It's the sixth commandment: do not murder. It means do not murder a person and do not murder a fetus, because a fetus is really already a person. Why there's no misa? We'll leave that. Why there's no death penalty? And therefore, the only time when it's going to be permitted is when that person in the womb presents a threat, an active threat to the mother. So that is approach number one, that it's murder, it's ritzicha mamish. Now, it could be that were it not for the pasuk in Parashas Noach, were it not for the pasuk in Parashas Noach, we would think that loy tzirsaf, do not murder, only applies to someone whose head came out. But now that we have a pasuk in Parashas Noach, which tells me that a non-Jew is shoipech dama adam ba'adam, he spills the blood of a person within a person, that it applies to fetus as well. So that tells me for Jews as well, because me committed, that tells me that for Jews as well, the loy tzirta, when the Torah says do not murder, it refers even to a fetus. But bottom line is it's ritzicha mamish, it's literally murder, and therefore it's only allowed when the child presents an actual threat to the mother. That's how Moshe Feinstein and others learn the Rambam. That's approach number one. The issue with this approach, and I'm not going to answer all the questions, the issue with this approach is that it doesn't sound like that from the Mishnah, because it's very difficult. And I'm not going to answer the question of the Rambam. I'm not going to go there. But I'm just going to bring the questions on the Rambam. The Rambam is difficult to understand, because what's going on? Before the baby is born, he's saying you can kill the fetus because the fetus presents a threat to the mother. After the baby is born, you can't, after the head comes out, you can no longer kill the fetus. Why? You can't push away one soul before another soul. But just a second, if you hold it literally murder, then what about before it's born? Was it a nefesh then? If it wasn't a nefesh, so then why do you have to come to say it's a roidev? If it was a nefesh, if before it's born it's considered a human being, then it should be a roidev. If it's not a roidev when after the head comes out, why should it be a roidev before? And if it is a roidev before, then it should still be a roidev after. What's going on over here? It's difficult to understand, and therefore this is the issue with this opinion, to say it's literally murder. And that's why many people explain the Rambam in other ways, that even Maimonides doesn't mean that. And one explanation, for example, is that Achiezer, Rabbi Chaim Oizer Grodzinski, lived not so long ago, in the beginning of the century, and the Torah's Chesed, also Chabad Rav, actually, who they both say on similar lines. I think they almost say the same thing, that in fact, Maimonides, when he says that the child is a threat, is a roidev, is a pursuer, like running after the mother's life, and that's why it's permitted, is only talking about when the woman is already sitting on the stool. She's already ready to give birth. So then the child has moved from its place, and therefore it's already got a status somewhat of a life, and therefore you need the reason of roidev. But early on in pregnancy, even the Rambam would say it's not considered murder, or rather maybe a different biblical prohibition. So even in Maimonides, it's not straightforward. The simple reading of Maimonides does seem to be like Moshe Feinstein and Chaim Brisk and others learn that that it's considered murder just always. But there are those who say no, the Rambam's only talking about specific situations. I mean, that's one problem. There's other problems with Maimonides' opinion. Which is a raya from the Talmud. The Talmud says in Erechin, and I apologize if I'm presenting it a certain way. It's not because there aren't good answers necessarily. I'm just limited for time, so I can only say what I can say. So I'm going to pose a question on this opinion. There are answers out there. Just because I'm not answering doesn't mean that it's less authoritative or I'm taking a side on the issue. I'm not. So the Gemara in Erechin Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in Erechin. That's Zayin Amud Aleph. Very fascinating Mishnah. The Mishnah says that it's a pregnant woman. She was Mechalo Shabbos. Okay, she was Mechalo Shabbos and therefore she's Chayiv Skila. She's going to be stoned, she's going out now to be killed. That's been Paskin. She's Chayiv Misa, but she's pregnant. She's 6 months pregnant. She's 8 months pregnant. Whatever you want. 4 months pregnant. Whatever. She has a baby. We say so logically, what's going on? We should wait till the baby is born. Let the baby live. What did the baby do wrong? And kill the woman later. No. Mishnah says, Ein mamtinin lo ad sheteitzi avlad. You do not wait until the fetus comes out. The only exception is if she's already sitting on the birthing stool, if she's already, and then she's already in labor when the psak, whatever, she goes to Bezdin, and towards the end of the psak, she goes into labor. So now she's in labor, and they want to know, should we kill her or not? No, that's different. Since the child's already dislocated itself from its mother somewhat, even though it's not out of the body, so it's not really a person, then it's different. Then we do wait. That's the mission in Erechim. And the Gemara even goes further and says that actually, when we execute the woman, we actually execute the fetus first. We kill the fetus and then kill the mother, because it would be embarrassing for the mother if the covered amay, so to speak, of the baby would come out after the mother. So so that's the Gemara in Erechim, which is very difficult. And not only that, the Gemara asks, when the Mishnah originally said that we don't wait till the right, the Mishnah says that the woman who's going to be executed, we don't wait till the fetus is born. The Gemara says pshita, it's obvious. Gufahi, it's part of her body. Now, just a second. If killing a fetus is murder, then what's the Gemara's question? It's obvious. What do you mean? It's obvious that because the woman is Mechal Shabbos and we're killing the woman and we're allowed to kill the woman, that we can kill the fetus as well. We can murder the, what's going on over it? What do you mean? How gufahi it's? What's going? Why is it so obvious? And why is just considered? So therefore, Latter-day authorities understand from here that obviously, not obviously, but they understand that it can't be that it's the act of murder, right? And therefore, in certain situations where there's a pressing reason, or there's over here where you're killing the mother, anyway, you can actually kill the child as well. It's a fascinating Gemara, which right, Talmud, which really like kind of, it doesn't seem right. I mean, to me, it doesn't sit well with me. A fetus is 8 months of pregnancy, and you're going to tell me that because the mother hasn't gone into labor yet, we're going to kill the woman and the fetus, and we don't care about the fetus. So this seems to all imply that right, and also the simple reading of the Mishnah in Alois, which says Ein doichin nefesh mimei nefesh, that once the baby's born, we don't kill the fetus because it's alive. But before that, as Rashi and others say, it's not alive. So there's a simple reading of the Mishnah in the Gemara, which kind of contradicts the simple reading of the Rambam, right? Which is the Shulchan Aruch's ruling. So it's kind of a tension over here. On the one hand, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch seems to imply that it's murder. But the sugyas, the simple reading of the Gemara, the way most Rishonim learn, and the Mishnah in Erechim, seems to say that it's not murder, because otherwise, why would you be able to kill a woman when she's in later stages of pregnancy? And similarly, Ramosha Feinstein has proofs to his opinion that it is murder, and I mean, okay. So therefore, there are those who say that no, it's not murder. Now, if you say it's not murder, there's still different ways. There's different ways of learning. One approach is that it's what's called abizrayu deritzir. It's a biblical prohibition. It's not literally murder, because at the end of the day, before a baby's born, it's not a nefesh, it's not a person. But the Torah says that you're not allowed to murder a person. And the Torah extended it and said there's a subcategory. We see these things, right? We see these things sometimes. There's a subcategory of murder, which is also biblically prohibited, but without the death penalty. Like in Avodah Zarah, you have certain things like that as well. But certain acts of Avodah Zarah are going to be chayav misa, the death penalty, and certain acts of Avodah Zarah are allowed, the negative prohibition. It's the same thing over here. You have the prohibition to murder a human being, and for that you get the death penalty, even a Jew. And then you have the subcategory, the abizrayu deritzich, the subcategory which isn't explicit in the Torah, but we understand that since the non-Jew is not allowed to do it, so we're also not allowed to do it. And it's and to me this actually makes a lot of sense. I'm just showing my why, because if you look at the pasuk by this to me, I'm just saying my own thing now. Yeah, if you look at the pasuk shoifach dam adam in Parashas Noach, where it says that the non-Jew gets the death penalty for killing somebody, the context is that it's shoifach dam adam, he's killing somebody, and that's why he's getting the death penalty. Because the person is made, and it's a context is murder. And just adding that, you know what, without the extra word in the person, which tells me that even a fetus is included. So it makes sense to me to say that it's not actually murder, but it's a subcategory of murder, which is subsumed under murder, which isn't as severe. And therefore, if it's presenting a threat to the mother's life, we're going to allow it to end the pregnancy, or even in other situations, like the woman is going to be killed, to be executed. It's not actual life, so obviously, so it's considered part of the mother. And okay. That's one approach. And then a little bit lower than that is the approach which is that it's not murder at all. There's no reason, no, it's not murder after all. It's not a nefesh, it's not a soul, it's not a human being. What is it? It's a biblical prohibition. And what's the biblical prohibition? We don't know. We don't know. We know it's biblically prohibited, because mi'ikamidi, could there be something that for a non-Jew is prohibited and for a Jew is permitted? That can't be. So we know it's prohibited, but we don't necessarily know why. And there's different explanations given. I saw in Nishmas Avram, is a Talmud of Reb Shlomo Zalman Oibach, who says that he heard from Reb Shlomo Zalman Oibach, and this is somewhat reliable, but I'm just throwing it out there. He says that he heard from Reb Shlomo Zalman that the problem of Murdering a fetus is like an extension of stealing. You're not allowed to steal someone's money, so you're not allowed to steal the father's money. And even more, in other words, you're not allowed to steal. I think he goes even further. The fetus, we know, has certain. He has a property. He can own things even before he's born. The fetus, in other words, has a right, has certain rights. It's not alive, but he has certain rights. You're not allowed to take those away from him for no reason. So you're not allowed to steal. It's not murder because he's not a person, but you're not allowed to steal the rights of the child, so to speak. The fact that he's going to live. So that's one approach, right? So far, we said three approaches. One is literally murder. Number two, and therefore it's only allowed because the child is presenting a threat to the mother's life. Just like if any person was running after, just like if a 50-year-old was running after the mother to kill her, so you'll be able to kill the 50-year-old. So the fetus is no different. It's true, it's not his fetus's fault, but that's the halacha. Second approach is it's a subcategory of murder. Just like we find in other things that there's a death penalty for certain avera, but then something which is lesser degree, there's a negative prohibition, but doesn't carry the death penalty because it's not really the actual thing. This is brought down by many, but I saw Rabbi Unterman, one of the chief rabbis of Israel, he uses this language, Abizrayu in the Maram Shik. Many people use this kind of terminology that it's the Abizrayu, I don't know the good English words, a subcategory. There's a fancy English word which I don't know how to pronounce, I'm not going to embarrass myself, of murder. The third one is it's a biblical prohibition, which is forbidden. We don't know why, but it's the non-Jew is prohibited. For sure, it's prohibited on a biblical level for a Jew. And then fourth is brought down by the Maharit, is that the negative prohibition is one which is chavola. It's considered wounding. A woman is not allowed to wound herself. So she's taking part of herself and she's destroying it. That's chavola. It's wounding yourself. And that kind of fits in with the language of the Gemara in Eruchim, which says that for sure a woman who's going to be executed can be killed before the fetus has been born. Gufahi, it's part of her body. In other words, it's part of her body. And were it not, and only because she's being executed, so then the fetus, but if she's not being executed, so she doesn't have a right to do whatever she wants with her body. A person can't just wound themselves. Those are the four options if it's biblical. And then if it's rabbinic, you also have the rabbinic option. The fifth option is that it's rabbinic and it's either it's murder. Others say it's shichva zera levatala, just like you're not allowed to waste seed. So this is later on. The seed is mamish potentially alive, so you're not allowed to. It's prohibited because of wasting seed, which is discussion. Wasting seed is biblical or rabbinic, but that's the issue. And people say also it's a problem of hepech yishuvi shel olam. There's a mitzvah to have children. This goes against it. So there's, generally speaking, let's just say there are five. For the purpose of this year, there's five categories. Okay, number one is it's murder. Number two, it's a subcategory of murder. Number three, it's a biblical prohibition, but nothing to do with murder, but it's a severe biblical prohibition. Number four, it's a biblical prohibition of wounding. The woman's not allowed to wound herself, not the fetus. The woman's wounding herself. And number five, it's a rabbinic prohibition. Okay, those are five things. And in the next 10 minutes or so, do I have another 10 minutes, Elio?
Okay.
What do you say?
Yeah, another few minutes.
Another few minutes. We'll wrap up just by giving some practical ramifications from these cases and maybe some interesting anecdotes as well. Okay, let's just. So the practical ramification is going to be like this. We'll start off with the Ramosha Feinstein, who takes the approach that it's literally murder. What ends up happening, what he writes is two things. First of all, he considers a case where the Rabbi Unterman actually considers this case. It's a true story that a Nazi, impregnated a Jewish woman, and he then ordered the Jewish physician to abort the baby, and told the Jewish physician that if you don't abort the baby, I am going to kill you. Okay. So is the Jewish physician? I imagine the Jewish physician went ahead with it, and the Shaila was asked later. I mean, I don't know, but was the Jewish physician allowed to kill the fetus to save his own life? So look, if it's a rabbinic prohibition, for sure. Not only that, if it's chavala wounding, you're wounding the mother to save your own life, for sure it's okay. Number three, if it's a biblical prohibition, but it's nothing to do with murder, also. Saving one's life, right, overrides the whole Torah. So any of those lower options, option number 3, option number 4, option number 5, for sure this physician would have been able to abort the fetus to save his life. The problem is the top 2 categories. So Rabbi Unterman argues that even though his opinion was that it's category number 2, ab Yisroel d'Ritzicha, that aborting a fetus is a subcategory of murder, and even though the Ramah says that the subcategory of one of the 3 cardinal sins, that you don't give up your life for the sin of either idolatry, idolatry, gilui aroyos, illicit relations, sexual, violating the sexual code, and murdering somebody. Says, and the Ramah extends it even to the subcategories. Rabbi Unterman says that because it's a combination of the fact that it's a subcategory of murder, plus it's not clearly in the Pasuk. The Pasuk doesn't say clearly you're not allowed to kill a fetus. It's learned out from Mia Kamidi that a non-Jew is prohibited, so we know a Jew is prohibited as well. So even though it's a subcategory of murder, he wants to say that it would be allowed. It would be allowed. And Ramosha says, what do you mean? First of all, Ab Yisrael, is it the subcategory? It's Ritzicha Mamish. It's Mamish. It's literally Ritzicha. So the point is that if it's, and Ramosha is not sure, he presents other arguments, but ultimately he's not so sure that it, right? So if you say it's 3, 4, 5, could do it to save your life. The same thing would be, by the way, the same. So, but if it's a subcategory of murder, or if it's or if it's literally murder, so it's more of a problem. If it's literally murder, who says you can kill somebody else in order to save your life? The reason why we're allowed to kill the fetus to save the mother, according to Moshe Feinstein's understanding of the Rambam, is because the child is presenting an active threat to the mothers. The child is a roider. But if there's no roider, if it's not presenting an active threat, it's just a question that my life is threatened. If I don't abort, if the physician doesn't abort the fetus, then he's going to call the physician. Who says you're allowed to do such thing? You're not allowed to kill one person in order to save your life. So that's one practical implication. Another practical implication they talk about is chas v'shalom, if a woman has yena machla, let's say. A woman has cancer, and the doctor tells her, you know what? I've got a good prognosis for you over here. In chemotherapy, surgery, chemotherapy for whatever, 4 or 5 months, and then the surgery, and the chances are it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. The only problem is the woman's pregnant. That's a no-no. It's not going to work. We can't do that. Either the fetus is going to be, we have to abort the fetus before starting chemotherapy, or the chemotherapy itself is going to destroy the fetus anyway. In other words, the fetus, there's no way the child can live and the mother. So again, this is the issue. If you say, like Moshe Feinstein, and I don't know whether he literally took this himself to logical conclusion, but it would make sense to say, based on what he says, that the only reason why it's okay, because it's literally an act of murder, and the only reason why it's okay to kill a fetus when it presents a threat is because the child is presenting a threat to the mother. The child is presenting, in this case, the child's not presenting a threat. It's the cancer which is presenting a threat, and the fetus is just it's a side damage, right? So it could be that according to Moshe Feinstein, it would be forbidden to do it in such a situation. However, if it's a regular biblical prohibition of some other kind, so then saving a life. And another point is that Moshe Feinstein says that the danger to the life has to be korev levade, very close to definite danger to the mother's life. But if it's not murder, if it's just a regular biblical prohibition, so then even if it's not a close to definite chance of the mother, it doesn't matter. On Shabbos, you don't need a close to definite danger to the mother's life. Even if there's a more remote danger to the mother's life, we're mechal Shabbos. So according to those poskim, those halachic authorities who say yes, it's a biblical prohibition, and it's a severe biblical prohibition, but the mother's life's in danger. It doesn't really matter necessarily how remote. If there's a significant danger to the mother's life, then it would be permitted. So that's as far as those opinions. Now, moving down, what happens if there's no danger to the mother's life? There's other situations. The classic situation discussed by the poskim is where no danger whatsoever to the mother's life, but the child, for example, chas v'shalom, is going to be born with Tay-Sachs. They can tell that towards the end of the pregnancy. They do sonogram, and they do amnio, and they can tell that the child has Tay-Sachs. Okay, Baruch Hashem, now we have tests which can avoid that. But before that time, and chas v'shalom, someone didn't take a test, whatever it may be, Tay-Sachs. Some severe deformity, the child's not going to, brain damage, the child's not going to be a functioning, but some serious. So what then? So again, if you hold that it's a biblical prohibition and it's murder, so then what do you mean? There's no danger to the mother's life. You can't end the pregnancy. However, if it's just the lower categories, either wounding, for example, certainly if it's a rabbinic prohibition, but wounding. So then there's room to say that in a place where there's such a severe tsar, such a severe pain to the mother, we know that wounding is allowed when there's a constructive, like a real need. You're allowed to, a person's allowed to take a surgery in order to improve their health or something. So if there's such a situation where the woman is going to have severe mental health issues with severe anguish by having a child for a few years, is only going to die a few years down the line. And that's the rule. So it'll be okay. And that's actually the basis of the ruling of the Tzitz Eliezer. But Eliezer Waldman was someone who lived recently, and he said that in such circumstances, permitted to do abortion up to the 7th month, at least in one shura, in one responsa, because it's even if it's probably it's rabbinic, and even if it's a biblical prohibition, it's wounding, which is allowed for extreme extenuating circumstances. However, if you say it's a biblical prohibition, more severe biblical prohibition, not connected to wounding, or it's considered murder or subcategory of murder, then it wouldn't be allowed in such a situation. So those are some of the practical ramifications which come out of it. My understanding is, by the way, that virtually no halakhic authorities today will go as strict as the Moshe to say that you need a death, danger to the mother, which is korov levadai, which is close to definite. But rather, the mainstream psak is that whenever there's a danger to the mother's life, even if it's a somewhat remote danger, like the case of a woman with yana machla, with cancer, and if they don't do chemo, if they don't abort the fetus, she's not going to live, they'll also permit. With regards to the more out cases, which are not a danger to the mother's life, there are those halakhic authorities who rule more leniently. Some do, some don't. But with regards, I don't think there's many who literally follow a Moshe that you need such a high level. So I just want to finish with an interesting story, which shows the compassion of a halakhic authority. The story is like this. In Rochester, I don't know which years, if this was in the 1970s or 80s, I'm not sure exactly which period, some probably 1970s or something like that. There was a frum woman, I think she was a frum woman, who was an older woman who had difficulty getting married, and she got married, in the late 30s, she, Baruch Hashem, she got pregnant, and unfortunately she found out that the baby, I think it was Tay-Sachs or some other severe deformity, which the baby wasn't going to be able to have a functional life. The doctor in Rochester was, interestingly enough, a frum doctor who had previously been a doctor in Israel and had consultation, learned with Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was one of the world-renowned halakhic authorities, passed away 15 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. Not so long ago. How long ago? More than 20 years, anyhow? I don't know. Okay. 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I'm getting old. I remember when he passed away. So so he called up Reb Shlomo Zalman. He calls up Reb Shlomo Zalman, and he says, "This is a situation. The woman went through this whole situation, and now she's pregnant, and the baby's going to be deformed. And if she has this baby, she's not going to want to have any other babies, and she has to. It's going to ruin her life. If she abort this baby, she can get pregnant again. She can have a baby. She can have a normal life." Reb Shlomo Zalman says, "You know me. You learned by me. You know my opinion. I don't allow it in these circumstances. I need that to be a danger to the mother's life or something close to that. This is not a good enough reason to abort the baby." So the doctor says, "Yeah," and he's told him the story. He says, "What do you want me to do? You know my opinion." So he says, do me a favor, think about it. What do you mean think about it? So what am I going to think about? This is my opinion. It's not forbidden. Doctor says, think about it. He says, "Okay, call me tomorrow." Shlomo Zalman in his mind was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to think about it. I'm going to allow the permitted. The only time you're allowed to abort a baby, in his opinion, was if it's a danger to the mother's life, or something which could bring to the danger of the mother's life. Here, it's not a danger to the mother's life. It's cause a tremendous anguish or whatever, but it's not a danger to the mother's life. He couldn't permit it. Okay. A day later, the doctor from Rochester calls up Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and he says, "No." Shlomo Zalman says, "I thought about it." And Reb Shlomo Zalman says, this is the same as Shlomo Zalman. A day early, he said, "I have nothing to say. That's as kind as I'd like to be. I don't see a way of permitting it." Reb Shlomo Zalman says, "You know my opinion. I hold it's forbidden. But I'll say the Hebrew is, Aval yesh posek mefursam b'Yerushalayim." There's a well-known halachic authority in Yerushalayim, referring to the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, who will allow it in these circumstances. Go ask the question. And what he was saying, I don't know whether he explained this to the doctor or not, what he was saying is this girl who lives in Rochester isn't a Talmidah, isn't a disciple of Reb Shlomo Zalman. She's not obligated to follow my psak. You don't have to tell me what I said. You can direct her to this Choisik with Tzitz Eliezer. He will give a permissive ruling. And so the halacha, the story is really to bring out that even the we have obviously, it's a very severe prohibition. It's really, generally speaking, it's only allowed when there's a danger to the mother's life. There are those opinions which say that even in other circumstances. But you see, Rav Shlomo Zalman had the compassion that that even though he couldn't permit it himself, he found a way of helping this woman out without compromising his own halachic view. And so that's basically the summary. That ends the shir. To 1 minute, if you give me 1 minute, I'll do a quick wrap up of the whole shir, which is that we presented 5 different opinions. I apologize. We presented 5 different approaches to the nature of the prohibition. Is it murder? Is it a subcategory of murder? Is it a regular biblical severe biblical prohibition? Is it wounding? Is it rabbinic? And based on those different situations, there will be practical ramifications. Do you need a very high level of danger to the woman's life, like if it's literally murder? Do you need the danger to the mother's life? And if you say it's rabbinic or it's wounding, so then it doesn't even need a danger to the mother's life, as long as there's some extenuating circumstances, so it will be permitted. And that's the summary of the shir. I apologize for going over time.
Thank you.
A hard one. It's a hard one to try and get. I had more to say, but okay. If there's any questions, yes, I'm here. I'm not running.
I have 2 comments.
Okay.
And first of all, I really enjoyed the shir. That's one comment. But your point about that non-Jews are chayav mitzvah for a number of things. You don't have to get on to the fact that it would be murder just because that a non-Jew is chayav mitzvah for it does not mean that it's necessarily murder.
Yes.
Point well taken. But the language of the Torah is a shofet shrichas damim.
Yes, 100%. And that's why when I continued, I said that to me it seems like it's a subcategory of murder, because you see that you see clearly that were the pasuk not to say ha'adam ba'adam, the Torah would have said it just meant person. The Torah, because it says so to me it seems from that passage it's a subcategory of murder. I will add, by the way, and that there's a ponim yofais on the Torah, and there's a sikh of the Rabbi actually, which says that a non-Jew, that pasuk of shoifech dam, spilling of the blood, actually means that a non-Jew is also prohibited, besides the simple meaning of the verse, which is murder, from wounding himself. So I don't know, so if that's the case, it could be the shoifech dam, the pasuk is talking about any harm to the person, whether it's a harm to the person's life or whether it's a harm to something which is within the. I'm not convinced. I hear what you're saying, and that's why I did say that I'm leaning to say there's some sort of subcategory of murder. But another thing is, by the way, is that just because for a non-Jew it's considered murder or considered a subcategory of murder doesn't mean that for a Jew it is as well. The principle of Mia Kamidi, which says that if a non-Jew is prohibited with something, so a Jew is prohibited, we see in other places in the Talmud, it doesn't mean it's necessarily the same prohibition. As long as, so that's possible. And for whatever reason, the Torah considered one murder, one not. That's already an interesting conversation.
Right, and then just the second point, you might be able to say that it's not a nefesh, but you can learn from that pasuk that it's an adam.
Yes.
So
what's semantics? Exactly what does adam? What's the difference between adam and a nefesh?
That's right. I don't know.
So that's why, again, if you go with a subcategory, it kind of makes sense. Murder is for a nefesh, for a real full-blown person. But the Torah also said there's a subcategory of murder for developing life, which is considered adam.
Well, it might be that it's a person, but because it's dependent on the mother to live, or some other factor.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
we're not going to go as far as to say.
Yeah. The question is that you're getting a little bit into semantics. If you can't find clearly what the practical ramification is, then it isn't necessarily. Well, we have to. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate your comments. Yes. Food for thought.
Rabbi, I very much enjoyed your presentation.
Have you turned the phone so they can see you?
Oh. Okay. Hi, Rabbi.
Okay.
2 quick questions. One is, in the story you just told, I thought I heard when it came to the idea of threatening a woman's life, that could go beyond the physical life. That could be some sort of also emotional or mental.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Okay.
But still, interestingly enough, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman wasn't willing to be lenient. So I don't know what his opinion was, because I have heard that even in other instances, the same Rabbi Shlomo Zalman was willing to take mental health into consideration as being a danger to the mother's life. Maybe it depends how severe. Yeah. Not every mental health problem is a danger to the mother's life, right?
Yeah, exactly. Very good. The other question is, when it comes to the accountability or the penalties for an
Right.
abortion, is this accountability or penalty different for the woman carrying the fetus versus the one who performs the abortion, or are they both equally accountable?
No, it's going to be the physician. He's
So-
doing
so
the
then-
act. And on a legal level, on a halachic level, when you talk about, let's say there was a death penalty, but again, there's no death penalty for Jews anyway. But let's say in this kind of messianic world or whatever, where or based on, you have a non-Jew who's living in a Jewish country, he's under your rule, and he's giving him the death penalty. It would be the person who's actually performing the abortion, no doubt.
But then the woman carrying the fetus, or maybe her husband, if the husband is for it or pushing for it,
Yeah.
they must be accountable to some extent.
Yes, no,
right?
100%. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
But not to the extent that the
No, not to the
person.
extent, it's whenever someone kind of help, enables a sin or is part of it, there's an issue. But the person who does the sin is ultimately the one who's technically getting the penalty, and is worse than the person who's just enabling it or allowing it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You have one more question over here?
Thank you for the lecture.
I can't see him. Okay, there we go. Good.
Okay, so the question of Mem Yom, the 40 days, but Pachos Mem Yom, before 40 days,
Learn to that. Yes. You want to know about before 40 days?
is there like the head of Pachos Mem Yom, the allowance before 40 days is considered mostly water, right?
Yeah. So
is it,
yeah.
are we saying that you can just have at it, you can have a walk
No.
for any reason, or?
No,
was
so
there
I'm going to
something
give a
that
quick
we're
word
saying that-
before 40 days. Well, first of all, 40 days is 40. I just want to say 40 days is going to be more like 52 days from conception, not from conception, from the missed period, the way the doctors count the pregnancy from the missed period, because mikvah is 12, 14 days later. So it's what's going to be what the doctors call 7 or 8 weeks, 40 days, 7.5 weeks. But it's just a definition, 40 days.
Okay.
Now, what's the truth with before 40 days? The point is like this: whatever you hold, not whatever, but even those, let's say, who say it's murder after 40 days and are very strict, will say that before 40 days, it's more lenient. The idea basically is, the question is how much more lenient. So I'll give you like the mainstream sack, for example, of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Moshe Sternbuch and others who were not willing to give, only when there's a danger to the mother's life, they were willing to give permission to abort. Before 40 days would say that if there's some extreme circumstances, even if it's not a danger to the mother's life, they'll permit. It's like, because there used to be something called CVS or something, I can't remember the exact term, that before 40 days, it could also possibly technically, you could work out if the child was, let's say, Tay-Sachs or some other deformity, and then they would give a heta. Not everybody, but yes, you're right. There's no blanket heter before 40 days, no, 100%. In fact, it's clear that not, because you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, according to many opinions. You're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to save a fetus, which is less than 40 days. If you could kill it on the weekday, yeah, then without, so then why not? Why do you have to be Mechal Shabbos in order to save it? So it's clear that even before 40 days, there is a prohibition. But the thing is, it's not the same prohibition. After 40 days, it could be murder, it could be subcategory, it could be a biblical prohibition. Before 40 days, it's more lenient. How exactly it plays out is an interesting conversation. We don't have time to go into.
And we say we draw the line where lenience become less lenient before 40 days, that it's a potential life, and you're being monea the potential of a life, and that alone could say,
right.
you just
after
can't
40 days, according to
abort.
some, it's already a
Before
developing.
40, you can't just have an abortion because you choose to. It's just a lifestyle change. Because there's a potential life that you're interfering with. Can we say that?
Extenuating circumstances, so then it may be okay.
Can we say that even interfering with something that potentially can come to term is an isser?
Yeah. The question is, what isser is it? And I'm saying
before 40 days.
Yeah, and the question is, what isser is it? And I'm suggesting that most halachic authorities, even Rav Moshe, by the way, if you read the tshuva carefully, he's very strict even before 40 days. If you read his response carefully, even Rav Moshe says it's literally murder. Before 40 days, he's not so sure if it's murder. He's not so sure. So the question is, it's prohibited, yes, but what's the prohibition? It could be a rabbinic prohibition. It could be a biblical prohibition of issue. You have to have children, so you're not allowed to interfere with having a child. there's different options, but it's definitely less of a prohibition than after 40 days, according to most, if not all, the vaccination authorities, depending on.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. All the
Thank you
best.
then.
Yeah. All the best.